Hey guys, Mr. Ridgway here, with continuing on our series of the interwar years and then also World War II. Today we're finally going to hit jazz. We're going to talk about, what it is and why it's significant, why it matters, and some other things too that we'll toss in there as well, besides jazz. So today being kind of a culture day in terms of what the Americans are up to in the 1920s, we've got some interesting stuff to discuss. So your warm up here, there's a link here to a clip of drunk history that we'll watch for our warm up. Check it out. Also, I'll have people write up on the board what they believe jazz actually is. Answers here could vary all over the place, but for our sake, if you're watching this video online, we'll cut right to the chase, as they would say. So our point here with jazz, we're going to kind of do this in a bit of an unusual way. Is that I'd like you to see how jazz gradually develops as a very culturally messy creation, and how, in a lot of ways, later art forms like hip hop and rap are going to take some of the remixing styles that come along with jazz and are going to kind of adopt some of those things later on. So we're going to focus on things like, improv and blending and stuff like that. So let's talk about that first, and then we can get on to other things. So the birth of jazz. How we're going to do this and how we're going to look at trying to explain jazz as this kind of very culturally messy creation is that we're going to be creating dual biographies of two different jazz artists. One from early jazz, which is going to be kind of pre-1920s or 1920s themselves, and then another era of jazz, which is in the 1930s, which is called swing. This is just something for you for a little bit of background information. Jazz goes through multiple different phases and forms. In the 1940s, for example, we get bebop, which is an incredibly difficult form of jazz that nobody can dance to. You can look up Charlie Parker if you'd like to. Check him out. He's worth your time. What are we going to create here? What is a dual biography? Well, you're going to be making one of these, and really there's kind of four elements to it. Number one is that you're going to be picking two artists, okay, as I mentioned there earlier, and you're just going to summarize briefly what their life was like. Besides doing that, okay, and just giving us some good background info there, I'd like you to focus on how the artist both adopts things that have come from before them, so blending, and then what they do to kind of push the boundaries to improv or go off in a new direction on their own. Once you've done that, then I'd like you to compare and contrast the two. You could compare, the different kind of music that they made with each other. You could compare, styles. You can compare different ways they were organized, or subject matter, or life circumstances. These kind of things. And then, last but not least, I certainly would like you to end your little dual biographies with connecting that jazz artist's life to larger themes and movements and trends that we've been talking about in American society. And these could be ethnic, they could be cultural, racial, economic. So, for example, many of these artists, not all of them, are going to have a lot of connections to do with the Great Migration, which we've talked about before. That's kind of the goal here. And so if you look down here, you click on the actual bars of music. That should give you everything that you need here. So right here, this will link you off to a video that gives you the introduction to jazz, and we're going to watch it. So that way, if you've never heard anything about it, you can kind of get an intro there. The rubric on how I'm grading you is right here, and I'll walk through that here in a second. And then I've got three models from students that have done these before. This right here, this section, is where you can find all the different biographies on the 8 different artists you can choose from. And then over here, the last option are the different apps you can use to make your dual jazz biographies, or at least ones that I would recommend. So introduction, you can watch that on your own. Let's check out the rubric. And the rubric pretty much just goes straight along with those 4 things that I mentioned. So notice for each artist, okay, and I'll go ahead and zoom in here so I can actually show this to you. So first step, summary, okay, and I've given you a an explanation of what you have to do there. An analysis, how did the artist riff off of previous musicians? How did they create their own style? And then again, a connection. How does the artist fit into the context of their time? And then you do that for artist 2. And then down here is the compare contrast. Did you give us a detailed analysis of the musical and organizational similarities and differences between your 2 artists? So we get to do a little bit of biographies, which is not always something that we always get to do in class and with history. We get to look at a very, very small micro level here, which is cool. So models, I've got 3 different student models here. I will let you peruse those on your own time. You will notice though that the models, they vary widely, but they always, no matter how they look, they hit the objectives there on that particular rubric. And they're well put together. There's a variety of styles that you can do them with. We'll get to that more here in the app section. Let's take a look at the bios though. So what I've got for you here, okay, so you need to pick one of these 4. So we have Scott Joplin, Ma Rainey, Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong, for the early era. And then for the swing era, you need to pick either Count Basie, Billie Holiday, Duke Ellington, or Glenn Miller. Now, you'll notice here that I have an arrow going from Jelly Roll Morton to Glenn Miller. And that is because consider this to be one of my recommendations as to artists that are easier to compare with each other. And so here I will go ahead and load up every arrow. For example, let's say that you really want to go with Scott Joplin as your first option, right? I would highly recommend then that you either compare him to Count Basie or Duke Ellington for reasons that will become obvious. Same thing like for Ma Rainey. Her options, because she comes from a very early kind of blues inspired version of jazz, we can call it. She's going to be most comparable to Billie Holiday in the 1930s. So again, I've tried to give you recommendations as to arrows to people that you could compare with, or could do some better compare contrast with. Now, when you click on an artist, well, let's take Scott Joplin here for example. There's a link to a biography. Okay, so I'm giving you a biography that you can pull information from. You're more than happy to quote, okay, like out of this. You don't need to cite it. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is when you are pulling information for your own summary of their life, or whether or not you're writing about their musical styles, or compare contrasting, is I'd like you to put it in your own words. So make it understandable for us, because you're not going to be writing as much as is what's going to be in those biographies. Again, if you need a sample of that, go check out the models and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So again, put these things in your own words. If you do have to go, if you feel like you need to go and get information from somewhere else to back up your writing, that's totally fine. You just need to make sure in that case that you cite it. Excuse me. Other than that, okay, what I've done to help you get a sense of the artist as a person then is I've given you a sample for every single artist, and you can see this here, that they all have 2 of their songs, and I did the best that I could to get links to them playing live. So that is all there for you. I'm going to hit the go back to our guide slide here, and that's pretty much the gist on that. For apps, okay, how you can actually do this thing. Over here is probably the simplest option. So you can do a Google Docs, and this template is here. Okay, it's really, really easy. You get 2 columns. You write your biography. I wouldn't recommend doing more than a page. I think about a column's worth of writing there is probably appropriate. And again, that's going to include the summary of them, an analysis of their music, how they borrowed from other artists and kind of forged their own path in some cases. And then as well, okay, down here at the bottom then, you'll see where you do the compare contrast. Now, you can also just use this area if you don't want to write your dual jazz biographies here. You can also just use this as a planning area. That's totally fine. Don't have a problem with that at all. I have some people, when they're actually then making their dual jazz biography, they prefer something that's a little bit more visual. That's totally fine. I've given you an example here of somebody who did a Prezi for theirs, and then another one here that is Google Slides. And if you go back to the guide slide here, there are models that show you how you can do that with both of those. However, I will recommend to you, if you've never done a Prezi before, don't do a Prezi, okay? Don't try to like learn a new technology to present at the same time you're trying to also, do a biography. That's not going to be fun. The thing that, if you are looking for a little bit more of a visual option, I recommend going with Google Slides. And probably, again, I think the easiest way to do this is to go to a site right here called Slides Carnival, where you can get tons of free templates. And that way it'll save you all the hassle of having to make it look nice. You just have to drop some pictures in there, maybe drop some music in, which is always nice. And there you go. Okay. Other than that, I'm ready. So I'm going to go on here to slide 16, which is where we're going to pick up with the rest of our lesson. So ballyhoo is our next topic. And it says, explain the rise and fall of ballyhoo in the 1920s. Well, what the heck is ballyhoo? Okay. So the 1920s is really interesting because in some ways, how I would tell you to think about ballyhoo is in a lot of ways like what the Victorians didn't want to have happen with entertainment in the United States. It is entertainment for its own sake, especially viral entertainment for its own sake. That's what ballyhoo is. Okay, so in the 1920s, we get all these different all these explosions of different forms of entertainment and recreation and things like that. And in some cases, they seem like they're just very strange and very out there, and they're kind of like fads that kind of fade. But the thing is also there's some of these things that are still around, which is kind of cool too. So I've got this worksheet here, and I'm actually going to recommend that you do this on paper. So print it out if you're doing this on your own, and you'll see very quickly why I'll recommend that you do it on paper here, because it looks a little confusing when you open it up. It's supposed to look confusing because ballyhoo is very messy. But if you are doing this on paper, I'll walk you through it. Don't worry, it'll be okay. I'm going to go ahead and let me see. Yeah. So just let me start with the preface that you only need to pick 2 of the 4 events on this next slide that have to deal with the era of ballyhoo. Okay, so first step, briefly summarize what the game is. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the worksheet so you can actually see it, and you'll get, a very good sense right away about why you want to do this on paper, because it looks very confusing. Okay, so let's break it down step by step. The rise and fall of ballyhoo, and you're like, oh no, it's a spiral. It's not as bad as the Red Ring of Death for Xbox, but we're getting close here. And you can see we have these 4 different things around the outside. Okay, we have Mahjong, we have crossword puzzles, we have Lindbergh's Flight, and we have the Scoops Monkey Trial. Now, these all happen in the 1920s, and again, this is viral entertainment for its own sake, right? So the first step, okay, of what we're going to do, I'm actually going to kind of start with the bottom here. It says the dark spiral. Summarize the event or game using the darkened areas. Do not write outside the appropriate pie slice. So for example, you can see down here on this model, okay, that I'm writing about the Scoops Monkey Trial, and I'll zoom like way in here so you can really see this. So if you kind of like turn your head sideways, you'll see I'm writing about the Scoops Monkey Trial, and I says, this event was when a fake trial, blah, 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 and I'm skipping and writing only on the black, right? You see how I'm doing that? But I'm staying within just that pie slice, okay? So that's kind of the first step. The next step, okay, is right up here. The white spiral going in. List what led to the rise of ballyhoo. Well, where you get that information. Okay, so here's our next slide. Okay, so Mahjong, crossword puzzles, Lindbergh's Flight, Scoops Monkey Trial, this one, and then you've also got a couple extra here. If you click the yellow dot in the center, this is the text that's about ballyhoo generally. And what you're going to do here, as I escape out of this for just a second, okay, you can kind of see it on the model here. I kind of spiral. The age of ballyhoo began because blah 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 blah, and I do my explanation, right? And then on the white spiral going outside, I say why ballyhoo ended. The age of ballyhoo ended because of blurga schmurga lurga durg. right? And there you go. Okay. Once you've then done that, okay, it's going to look like a whole mess of text that you've read. And that's the whole point. Ballyhoo is an incredibly confusing and entertaining thing because that's what it was supposed to be. Again, just this kind of viral entertainment. So how do you discover what they are? Well, you click on the different resources around. That'll give you all the info that you need. And then again, the text is the yellow button right here in the very center. And that gives you the explanation for the rise and fall of Ballyhoo. Okay. And again, we'll debrief this some in class. So if you feel very, very lost on Ballyhoo, you're like, you keep saying it's viral entertainment, I don't understand it. Kind of think of it like clickbait, but without the internet. So again, we'll have a chance in class to actually break it down and debrief. With that though, I've spent here about 15 minutes explaining just the first half of the lesson. I'm going to go ahead and take the rest of this time, about 15 minutes or so, to work with you through our mini lesson today, which is on the 1920s consumer culture and how it's going to change how Americans are living, and just experiencing life. Okay, so Coca-Cola is delicious, good to the last drop, for reasons other than the fact that it's just Coca-Cola. It's what it's got in it, right? All right, so we're going to be looking here at how consumer products and a consumer culture really affects the way that people behave, and also the effects that those have then on society in the long term. So the thing with the 1920s that's very unique is by the time that we've gotten all the way through World War I, Americans have more market power, buying power, than they've probably ever had before. And with that, with economic times being relatively good, don't get too attached to that. There's also a simultaneous growth in advertising and leisure time. Okay, the times of for example, like the very strict Victorianism is kind of fading away at the same time that we have more advertisement and Americans have also more money. And so then you put those things together, and people start purchasing more consumer goods. And I've just provided you here like a list of, things, handheld cameras, wristwatches, cigarette lighters, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the list just goes on and on and on and on. There's so many things that are new to buy that consumers can have for their homes in the 1920s, which is, again, really interesting to study in terms of like watching how people behave. The thing, and again, like the summary of why we get this is, well, if you give Americans money and also you give them more time and also you advertise things that they can do with that time or purchase in that time, we get a whole lot more purchasing, right? And with that, not that I'm sure this will ever come back to bite America in the butt ever, is that installment buying becomes popular here. Get your Bowflex today for 75 easy payments of $29.99, not counting shipping and handling, right? So this idea of I get to own the product, but I still have to pay it in chunks, becomes really popular here in the 1920s. So again, it's a sign of the times, right? And let's talk more about radio and media as well, because that's also changing. The way that Americans are getting their info and their entertainment is dramatically shifting in the 1920s. Because, first of all, radio gets invented. Okay, the first commercial radio comes out in 1922, and by the time we hit about the mid-1920s, they're everywhere. They become nearly ubiquitous in most American homes. So by the time we get into the late 1920s, we have NBC and CBS, still around today. And then eventually, the federal government realizes, oh my gosh, there's a lot of businesses jumping into this. We had better regulate the airwaves so that there's actually some rules set out for this whole thing, and that's when we get the FCC. Okay, which is probably most of you are familiar with the FCC for the thing that bloops and bleeps things on TV. So there you go. the Federal Communications Commission. Now, movie theaters are also changing. Movies have been around for a long time. Again, Nickelodeons are around in the early 1900s. But movie theaters soon become talkies. Talkies are movies that include sound. So that's a brand new form of entertainment as well that Americans were able to enjoy and did enjoy. With that, then, we finally are going to talk about the automobile. And the reason why we're going to talk about the automobile now is because we can kind of lump it into the 1920s, because by the time we hit the 1920s, it's silly popular. Henry Ford's Model T comes out in 1908, and it's $850, which, if you adjusted for inflation, is about $2 million. Real expensive. But by the time that we get, roughly about 20 years later, they're remarkably cheaper, because the cost of manufacturing them has gone down. There's also way more of them available. And by 1919, there's 23 million cars on American roads. The thing about the automobile is that it's going to change everything for Americans. We're going to get slews of new industries. The oil industry becomes a thing for the first time, because before it really just wasn't utilized in that, by average Americans. The idea of restaurants that you could go and drive to, eventually drive-throughs, but we're not there yet. Car repair. So we get all these new industries that come around with the automobile, right? But then we also have these profound effects on society as well, just as a whole. Suburbia now can become a thing with the invention of the automobile, and whites across the United States are going to use the automobile in combination with interstates to flee from inner cities, from having to live next to people of color. Also then, because they're not shopping downtown anymore, we're going to see shopping malls get invented in suburban areas. Those are a product of, again, the automobile happening. The other thing is it's also going to change how Americans date, and how they have relationships with one another. Everything, the amount of freedom that an automobile gives, compared to dating in the past, is remarkable. And these effects, with the automobile, as it becomes more and more and more popular throughout the 1900s, just simply multiply over time. So the automobile is crazy, crazy influential. So with that, okay, there's an exit ticket here. And once you're done with that, we can go on to the rest of our lesson. Next block, I think we're going to be looking at, I think we're going to be checking out Hoover in the 1920s. So I think that's where we're headed. So other than that, I will see you guys later. All right, bye-bye.